Amud Beis. We're on page 31b, and we did a little started a new little piece over there, new piece of Gemara with the next topic. So what we were talking about yesterday was it had to do with the situation where a person doesn't have a kosher esrog. Should they use a invalid esrog instead? We were discussing that option based on a Teves over here. Teves on the bottom of 31a. The Gemara had mentioned not to use a pomegranate or not to use a parish, a quince, but the question was maybe you could use a non-kosher esrog. And it seems from Teves that although he says it's not 100% proof from the Gemara, but he concludes it's not 100% proof. Let me mute everyone. Let's try now. Sounds better. So although it's not 100% proof from this Gemara of the light from this. Okay, Moshe, your machine somehow messes us up, so I'm going to mute you. Okay, so I don't know why, but you have a lot of influence over here, Moshe. It should be positive. I want it to be a positive influence. So okay, so the Teves had said that the language used in that Tosefta was lo yavi, lo remind, lo parish. Person shouldn't bring a remind, pomegranate, not a quince. So from there, Teves says it seems to be implying like an esrog would be good, even if it's a non-kosher esrog. But then Teves says that's not 100% proof because it could be a pick those examples and not the esrog example because those examples are much nicer fruits. They're complete. They're not a puzzle esrog, which is missing something. It's invalid for various reasons, and these are maybe a beautiful pomegranate. It's a complete pomegranate. It's a complete quince. So nevertheless, he says, but you see from the case of lulav that even something that's invalid, there's a concept of shas hadchak in time of great need that it could be used. And just like we find the rabbis held that the lulav could be used in time of great need, so therefore you would be able to use a esrog in time of great need. And even though it's invalid, you use that esrog, even though it's an invalid esrog, in time of great need. And this is connected to a machlokes of the Rishonim on how to learn that story where they used to give their grandchildren their lulavs. They would inherit them to the grandchildren. How do you learn that story where the rabbi said that, yeah, the grandchildren used it in a time of great need? What is the meaning of that? That the grandchildren used it in a time of great need, shas hadchak. And there were two opinions. They're both brought in the Rush. The Rush brings the Ravid, and then he says his own opinion. And basically, the Ravid wants to say that it's only considered it's not really a mitzvah. It's just in order not to forget the rule of a lulav. Therefore, even though the lulav is dried out, nevertheless, you still could use it, not to fulfill the mitzvah, but use it because you shouldn't forget it. You shouldn't forget shleich tishtakach Teves, the Teves lulav, mitzvahs lulav. You shouldn't forget the mitzvah of lulav. So that's the understanding that the Ravid has, which basically means that you're not really doing a mitzvah, but you should use a lulav even if it's a not kosher lulav. The other opinion is the Rush, and he says, no, they obviously were fulfilling the mitzvah, and that there is a concept of shas hadchak, that you could fulfill the mitzvah. And how to understand the Rush is, of course, a topic of the later commentaries, how to understand that you're fulfilling the mitzvah with something that's really non-kosher, which normally can't be done. Even if says even b'diavad, it's not, you didn't fulfill the mitzvah, but all of a sudden shas hadchak, now it's okay. So the explanation we gave was based on the Or Sameach, that he says the word hadar is something that's relative, and the rabbis had the ability to explain it. They have the right how to explain it. In other words, they are explaining that hadar is something relative, and therefore, when you're in a situation where it's available, then this is called beautiful. When you're in a situation where this is not available, then you got to use the most whatever whatever you have. That's what you consider beautiful based on what's available in your place. So in a place where it's hard to get a lulav, this would be considered hadar. This could be considered beautiful. So that would be the meaning of shas hadchak, that, and you would fulfill the mitzvah, even though you don't have a kosher lulav. Now, this really takes us back. I don't know if you remember, but it does take us back to another discussion of how dried out does a lulav need to be invalid. We had a Teves that we mentioned about it, where we said, well, does it mean that it's totally dissolves when you touch it? When you put some pressure on it, it crumbles? And or does it mean that there's no more moistness to it? I don't know if you remember, but that was an important Teves that we had seen on the top of 29b, that the Teves over there says that Yavesh, don't translate it like it says about the seeds of the chartzanim, that are the seeds of the grape seeds of the goyim, that when they're dried out, then they're allowed, and that's after 12 months. So Teves wants to say, don't compare it. Doesn't depend on 12 months, and it's not dependent on time, because you see by hadas um, that it doesn't go by a time. There's no specific time limit. In other words, there's certain rules of dried out that do go by a time, that 12 months is considered dried out, like when it comes to grape seeds, and the halachas regarding that with regard to yayin nesech, unkosher, non-kosher wine. But here, Teves says that Yevashos would be subject to the rules similar to what we say by a bachar, a firstborn, that if the firstborn is, it says Yavsha ad shetehei nifrechas b'tzipayren, that his ear is dried out. To that extent, that would be considered a yavesh, mum for bachar. That would be considered a blemish. So the way Teves seems to conclude is that it goes by the yavesh means that it's dried out, that it would crumble. And the commentaries question that Teves. Well, it comes out, and the reason I bring it up here is because we're talking about a dried out lulav. According to that opinion, it's very rare to have dried out. I remember in my house, when I was younger, growing up, we used to have a place where we would have all of our old lulavim for the last 40 years. They had all the lulavim there in some type of a vase that held all the lulavim, and they would not crumble when you would touch them. So it definitely seems surprising to say such a ruling would be dependent on crumbling. I mean, he is talking about grandchildren, so maybe he's talking about, instead of 40 years, he's talking about 80 years. But nevertheless, the commentaries do question this Teves, and they say that seemingly the dryness is maybe not the measurement of the crumbling, but more connected to how much moisture is in the lulav. So that's the subject of discussion. If it's completely white, basically, that would be the that would be the a symbol that all the moisture is dried out. There is another opinion that if you fold it in if you fold it into two, um, so it'll crack along its length. And then, of course, you have the what Tosfos says is not the shot that 12 months. There is such an opinion that it is 12 months. There is such a view. Anyway, that's the discussion about what dried out means. So I mentioned this because here we're talking about the dried out lulav. How common is it to have a dried out lulav? So if you follow Tosfos, it's not common at all. But if you follow the other commentaries, so it is a year of it's dried out. Our lulavim dry out even before a year. So then it could be considered quite common to have a dried out lulav. In any event, that was a topic of discussion. The dried out lulav, the other species that if they're a problem with, we have the same ruling. Of course, this is a topic of brought in halacha where you're in a place where you don't have the species, one of the four species that you need for sukkahs. That you use an old one. A lot of people save up their esrogim. They use their esrog from previous year. Then you use a lulav from a previous year. So these are would that be advisable? And this is a topic discussed in Shulchan Aruch. Baruch Hashem, in today's day and age, I guess it's not as common. Although I do remember when I was in Brisbane, Australia one year for Sukkot, we had shipped to us aravos, and when they arrived, all the leaves had fallen off. It was a big problem. We had to figure out what to do. We somehow came across some willow bush somewhere where we somehow took some willows, and but you could get stuck if you live in a far out place and they ship you and it's they ship you the stuff and it doesn't come fresh. It doesn't come. You could have a problem of missing one of these species. Anyway, the other let's see, the other Gemara the other discussions that we were talking about is we talked about the Gemara had mentioned about an esrog that is yaroik kikarti. It's green like leeks. Tosfos has a whole discussion. What exactly is this term yaroik? Because you find other places where yaroik sounds like it's blue, and then Tosfos says, well, you find other places where yaroik sounds like it's yellow. So what color is this yaroik? Anyway, Tosfos concludes, it must be that it's green, and that is it is a color of an esrog, and when it's unripe.
Oh.
Now, the Gemara had said that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the Gemara wanted to say, you know why it's invalid if it's green, if it's green like a leek, it's invalid according to Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara said it must be because Rabbi Yehuda holds that an esrog needs to be beautiful, hadar. And that's why if it's green, it's not hadar. It's not valid. So that's the Gemara's understanding of Rabbi Yehuda's reason why if it's green like a leek, it's invalid. The Gemara answers that no, that's not why it's invalid. The reason it's invalid is because it's unripe. If it's unripe, it's not kosher. Not kosher for the mitzvah. So Tosfos wonders what happens if you have a green esrog, but it's going to become ripe it's going to, the color is going to come back if you just leave it. So in other words, you picked it off the tree when it's green, but if you leave it around, it will ripen. So is that called, but the way Taisus is understanding the Gemara is that there's a stage where you take it off the tree too early, it is not going to ripen. You took it off too early. This is called a unripe fruit. But then there's a stage where it's ripe. In other words, you can't really call it ripe, but it's ready to be harvested. There's a stage where it's ready to be harvested, and it actually will. So it's finished. It's completed. It's completed its growth. It's ready to be harvested. In time, it's going to actually become more soft, but it's already finished its growth. It's not going to grow more off the tree. So you can't call it like gamar pera. It didn't finish its growing. The fruit hasn't completed its growth, because really it did complete its growth. It's just not soft yet, and it's not the color didn't come to it, but it's completed its growth. So the way Tosfos is understanding that when it's green like leeks, then the Gemara says it's not finished its growth. That is not a valid esrog. But what about the esrogim that they sell in the Svarim store, in the Judaica stores? You have esrogim that are completely green, completely green. Those are going to get ripe. They're going to be ripe soon. So is that a problem, or is that okay? So Tosfos wants to say those esrogim that we find that come before us that are green like leeks, they are kosher even according to Rabbi Yehuda. And Tosfos says a line here that's the topic of a lot of debate. When they return to their color, to the color of other esrogim, even after they're harvested, and they wait around in a vessel a long time, because for sure their gamar perium, their fruit, for sure they have finished their gamar perium. The fruit has reached its stage of completion. So therefore, it would be kosher. So the topic of discussion in Tosfos, does Tosfos mean that you cut it off when it's green, and do you need to wait until it actually gets the color of other esrogim, which is yellow or gold? Would you need to wait till then? Or does I say, since it's going to get to that color, so therefore it is considered gamar perium. It is considered that it's complete, because you harvested it at a time when all it needs is to just change color, but it's completed its growth. So two ways of learning Tosfos. The common understanding is that it's kosher even if it's green, completely green. And according to that, so you can't go to the farm store and tell the owners that these esrogim are totally green, they're non-kosher. No, it's not true. They actually are kosher, because they will ripen. Might take a month. It might be after Sukkot, but they are considered they would be considered kosher seemingly if they because they will, according to this Tosfos, because they will ripen. Now, the Mishnah Berurah says not to rely on this, because what happens if it doesn't turn? What happens if it doesn't ripen? Maybe it isn't ripe yet. Maybe it isn't ready to be picked off. Rather, you should take a esrog that started getting gold, that started getting yellow. And there is a more bigger chumrah according to the Bach that says that the rabbis argue on Rabbi Yehuda. They hold that an esrog needs to be hadar. Rabbi Yehuda says it doesn't need to be hadar, doesn't need to be beautiful. but it needs to be Gamar Pera, has to be completed its growth. The rabbis argue, they hold it has to be Hadar. So according to the Bach, he says, so if you need Hadar, it's puzzle not only because of Nigma, it's not finished its growth, but also because it's not beautiful. And so therefore, according to the rabbis that hold of this law of that it has to be beautiful, you should make it invalid until it's completely like the color of a regular esrog, and it's not enough to be partially. It started getting yellow, and part of it is green. You got to wait till it's much more yellow. So the Bach has a chumrah. So that's interesting to know that according to the Bach, which is not necessarily the final halacha, but it's something if you want to be machmir, if you want to be strict, you would want to have a more yellow esrog, because the way the Bach is understanding it, the rabbis argue in Rabbi Yehuda, they hold you need to have hadar. So you need a gemar pera, you need finished its growth, and you need hadar, it needs to be beautiful. And according to the rabbis, the problem would be here that even if it's green and it's gemar pera because it's going to get yellow, but it's still not hadar, which is the assumption of the Gemara. So the Bach has an interesting point. It's got a good point that maybe the rabbis would hold that green would be invalid because of hadar. The Gemara understood Rabbi Yehuda to mean initially that also Rabbi Yehuda held it needs to be hadar. The Gemara answered that no, Rabbi Yehuda holds of the Gemar Pera issue, doesn't hold of the hadar issue, but the rabbis do hold of hadar, and according to the rabbis, then it should be yellow like an esrog, and this could be invalid because it's not hadar. Okay, something to think about. Interesting chumrah to have. Yes, Moshe. Rabbi,
what happens if it's on the other side of the spectrum? It becomes very soft. Is it possible if it becomes very soft, or if it's internally in the esrog, that's a sign it could be molding. There could be mold developing inside.
Right. Yeah, we're gonna see some other cases soon, and then we'll see Shulchan Aruch. So it does talk about these things in Shulchan Aruch. There's also another issue that a lot of people handle it. The more they touch it, the more you shake lulav with other people, it ends up changing its color a lot. It gets these brown spots on it. So we'll talk about these things over the next couple of weeks. Okay, so the Gemara then mentioned about the shear, the measurement of an esrog, and the measurement of a small esrog. Reb Meir said is a walnut. Egois is it's a walnut. Reb Yehuda says a kabetza. The smallest size is an egg. These were the sizes of. Mar said, "No, it must be because of hadar." And Mar answered, "No, it has to be gemar pera. It has to be finished. It has to complete its growth." And the question would be, if an esrog is yellow, but it's less than the size of an egg, what would Reb Yehuda do with such an esrog? Because on the one hand, it looks like it's gemar. It looks like it's ripe, ready to go. It's yellow, gold. But on the other hand, it's small. So the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda seems to be it has to be kabetza. The minimum size is kabetza. But why should that be if it's already yellow? It seems like this is completed its growth. So the Sfas Emes wants to say that according to Rabbi Yehuda, there's two parts to growth, finished its growth. One is in color, in flavor, and the other is in its size. That it might have it might be a colored properly. In other words, it has the gold color, but it didn't finish growing physically in size. So there is such a this seems to be the Gemara's answer that Rabbi Yehuda holds that it's got to be kabetza because of the size issue. and if it's not the size of a kibetza, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that would be another aspect of its growth, meaning it has to grow to be Gemar Pera. It has to be. It can't be green. Can't be. It has to be finished in color, and it has to be finished in size, and so that it has to grow enough. Then the Gemara said, "What's the maximum size?" And the Gemara had these opinion that you could that the maximum size is to hold. You have to be able to hold two of them in one hand. And the Gemara used the word shnayim biyodayachas, two in one hand. There is a girsa, there is an opinion that it's that you need to hold both the lulav and the esrog in one hand. That you have to be able to hold the esrog and the lulav together in one hand. In this way, if you pass it to the other hand, it won't be a problem. In other words, you won't get it. You have to be able to hold both in one hand at the same time. This way, passing it won't be a problem, which we mentioned a little right afterwards. Now, anyway, so either you have to hold two in one hand, two esregim, or you have to hold the lulav and the esrog in one hand. But however you learn, that's the according to Rabbi Yehuda, you need to have like a little space. Rabbi Yossi says, nah, even if you need two hands to hold the esrog, it's kosher. And we'll see later in the Gemara. The Gemara is going to talk about if it's if it's really big, you need to carry it on your shoulder. Now, the Gemara then said that is the reason of Rabbi Yehuda isn't it because of Hadar? It has to be beautiful. And the Gemara answered, no. The reason is that you're going to hand it from one to you might have to move the lulav around and the esrog around, and the esrog might end up falling and it'll become puzzle. So therefore, what's the law? An esrog that's too big, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is invalid. Why? Because we're afraid it's going to get puzzled. Now think about this. You have a kosher esrog, and Rabbi Yehuda says, nope, you don't fulfill the mitzvah with it. Why? It's too big. What do you mean it's too big? He says, well, it's a kosher esrog. You have a kosher lulav and hadasim and hara. Everything's kosher. It's too big, but we're nervous that you're going to take it in the wrong hand. It's going to fall and become invalid. So therefore, I'm going to tell you that it's invalid now. What's so bad? So it'll get invalid later. When it falls, you're taking away my biblical mitzvah and telling me I'm not fulfilling the mitzvah because why? Because it might end up falling later, and then it might get puzzled. And you know what I mean? Like, why did the rabbis make such a law? It sounds very surprising. The rabbis are going to make a law to make it invalid and tell me, you know what? That's not a kosher esrog. It's too big. What's a big deal if it's too big? It doesn't say anywhere it can't be so big. No, because we're nervous that it's going to fall. I mean, it definitely sounds like it's taking things a little far. Like we're controlling your life almost. Like we're making sure you don't make any mistakes and it doesn't fall and you'll fall. What's so bad about falling? It's not a terrible sin if it falls and it becomes puzzle. So this seems to be an interesting case where you see this type of a scenario where the rabbis prohibit something because they're afraid that it'll become puzzle afterwards. It'll become invalid. You won't be able to use it. But we did find a similar type of case where you use the animal for your wall of the sukkah. And what was the problem? We're afraid the animal might die or run away. So what do you see when so you have a similar idea where the animal is kosher. You could use it Minat Torah biblically, and the animal is kosher for the sukkah. Nevertheless, the rabbis were afraid that it's something is going to end up happening. And therefore the rabbi said, you know what? Don't try to use it in the first place. And so they have the ability to be mavatal a mitzvah min Torah. They nullify the mitzvah, so to speak, and say you're not fulfilling it, and you need to take something else in order to do the mitzvah. So you do have that idea here where the rabbis were concerned that it might get puzzled. Now, what exactly are they nervous? So it'll get puzzled and it'll be invalid, and you'll buy another one. What's the problem? So one way of understanding it is that we're afraid that you won't realize that it's invalid. It's going to be invalid with a hole. Rashi says over here, what's going to happen when it falls? So Rashi over here says that if it's too big, it might fall, become invalid. Sheyera by nekev, it'll be a little hole in it, which means it's going to have a small blemish that'll be missing something. It'll have a nekev, a hole. It's going to bang on something, and you won't realize, according to at least the commentaries want to explain what's the problem if it has a hole, that you won't realize it, and you won't end up fulfilling the mitzvah with another one. And you're going to end up saying the bracha on this one. The other thought is that what happens, it might become invalid and you're not going to have another one to use for the mitzvah. So these are the two ways of understanding. Again, just spelling out what is the concern. What exactly are we concerned about? We're either concerned that you're going to think it's kosher and it's really not, or that you're not going to have another option to use if this one is invalid. And so therefore the rabbis made this type of a decree. Again, it's a surprising type of decree that they're overly concerned about you and about your esrog, that it might get invalid, but they're concerned if you spell it out, so you understand a little more, that it has to do with the fact that they're nervous. You might end up saying a bracha on it if it's invalid. And as Rashi says, it might have a hole, and maybe you won't realize that it's a little piece cracked off, or you got a hole in it because of maybe it banged on top of a nail or something, or some banged on top of something. Or the other option is that maybe you're not going to have another one to use, and you'll end up ruining your mitzvah of esrog. Therefore, Therefore, the rabbis prohibited you using a lula, an esrog that's too big. Okay, now, then the Gemara concluded and said that the fact that the pasuk says hadar, what does Rabbi Yehuda do with the fact that the pasuk says hadar, and Rabbi Yehuda is going to argue that you don't need it to be hadar? It doesn't have to be beautiful. The esrog doesn't have to be beautiful. It says in the pasuk it has to be pre-eitz hadar, fruit of a tree that's beautiful. The Gemara answers no, that hadar is hadar bi'ilonoi mishana l'shana, that it dwells on its tree from year to year. It is a little surprising that the Gemara concludes with this understanding of hadar. Why? Why is it surprising? Because the Gemara later will give a few interpretations. So what does the Gemara mean when it just says, oh, you know what hadar means? So Tosfos over here says that Ben Azai is the one who darshans, who explains it this way, or a Bavo. And Tosfos says there's also other drushes over there. What Tosfos seems to mean is that the Gemara doesn't mean specifically that Rabbi Yehuda learns hadar means hadar bilana mishana l'shana. That's one option that he learns it that way. He might learn the other pshatim. The Gemara is not getting into it now. We're going to get to it soon. But the point is that there's other ways of learning hadar, that it doesn't necessarily mean hadar, the beautiful. It could mean hadar be'ilana mishana l'shana. we mentioned yesterday that there's also there's a discussion here that Hadar Be'ilani Mishana Lashana. Is that really what the Gemara? Is that the proof that it means an esrog is because it's the only tree that stays on its the only fruit that stays on its tree from year to year, that it doesn't fall off? Is that Rashi says that? So Rashi seems to understand it that way, that this is the proof that it means an esrog. Other commentaries want to say no. The pre-Eitz Hadar means an esrog. We know that it means an esrog, and this is just an asmachta, like a hint to the people who question maybe it's not an esrog. Oh, no, Hadar means Hadar Bilanu Mishal, but really Hadar itself is the translation of esrog. There's such an understanding that really Hadar could mean, and this follows this idea that really there are other fruits that might dwell on their tree from year to year, but this is like an asmachta, hint,
Rebbe,
referring to
when we say dwells on its tree from year to year, I'm just trying to understand what, from what I understood, and I had learned this last year, I was studying more about esrogim. It is the only tree that has no season. It grows it throughout the year. There's no particular time that an esrog grows that you have to reap harvests.
Mm-hmm.
It goes constantly, and it's the only tree of its kind. That's what makes an esrog, I guess, different than all other fruits, is that, so when you say it grows from year to year, I'm just thinking maybe it means more throughout the year.
Mm-hmm. You mean any time of the year you could plant it and
it'll grow, and you can pull one off and another one grows. There's no season to them.
Right. This is not the real source of this Gemara. Really, the Gemara is further. So we're going to come to that. The Gemara, it's on page 35. We're going to come to it, and we'll see exactly what it means over there. How the commentaries discuss it. Shadar be'ilanai mishana l'shana. That it's found on the tree more than a year.
There's no crop. Like when you have the harvest of the wheat, we have the concept of chadash. Well, I guess that means when it's reaped. But the point is that there's no new season for them. They grow throughout the year and they stay longer than a year. They'll hang there, I guess. I don't know how that works, Taka. But there's no particular season that they grow or fall or anything.
Yeah, according to you, the way you're understanding it, which maybe is one of the pshat. I guess you saw this pshat somewhere, right? Or you just understood it that way.
I've seen this independently, not as a pshat. That's how I introduced this. This was not a pshat. This was a fact.
This was more of a study.
Interesting. I was reading
duology.
About esrogim. Where do they grow? How do they grow? And somewhere I picked up that there was no season. There's no crop when they grow best or when they harvest. You can do it throughout the year. Right.
I hear you. Maybe that's one of the meanings here, that it's that it's always on the tree. There's always a esrogim on the tree, because whenever you cut it, a new one grows. There's always growing another esrog.
Right.
Which is interesting. I've never tried growing esrogim, but
neither have I. Actually, that's not true.
But the thing that I would question is, if that's the case, why do we always have a problem when the year is like a leap year? We often get issues with this year the esrogim are not as ripe, or this year. Look, it would seem, according to what you're saying, they could be able to calculate it. They should calculate it well, because all they need to do is pull off the bad ones, pull off the ones that are growing, and then it'll grow again. It'll start right now. So let it start exactly in, let's say,
I
start in July. What?
I agree with you, but I don't know
Yeah,
if I plant it in July, if it comes up, that quickly, or if it takes longer. This I don't know. If you're
right. I'm saying,
trying to
but some
do a
people,
business that is timed, you obviously want a huge crop around a certain time, and it should take it easy the rest of the year. I don't know how you grow a
right.
Sroigan.
I'm interested. Yeah, I just find I would think that it. I mean, you did research, so I can't argue.
No, no,
According to your
no.
research,
I'm only posing for your thought, just to
right?
change the thought process. That whatever you're thinking of being shana l'shana, what does that mean? One way of thinking of it or viewing it, it'll take a while to settle in. It's a whole new way of thinking.
I no,
That
I understand, but you're not just coming up because sounds interesting. You actually found out that an esrog tree is this way. Is that right? You did
yes,
research and you
that
found out that that's
esrogim,
true
I
about an esrog.
found that esrogim are
Uh-huh.
different than other fruits in that they have no season.
Hmm.
And I
Interesting.
don't remember the source of this. I can't tell you how authentic this is. This is a
Right.
big problem with quoting in the internet world.
Right.
You
Uh-huh.
have to keep slicing through the garbage.
Right.
But one thing that I picked, and I was posing it to you almost as a question, not even as a
Uh-huh.
statement, could
Right.
it be that it means it's always there
Right.
because
Right.
there is no season? Now, how that affects the growing rate, or how do you plot for next year, Yontif, I can't tell you. But I just thought it was fascinating enough to look into as to whether what makes the Esther tree different. When we say pre-Eitz Hada, and we all go running for a Sroigan, and people look at us like, lemons look nice too. But to be able to explain to somebody what's the difference between an esrog, what makes an esrog unique,
Right.
if it
I
is
hear
a
you.
fact that it is the only fruit that grows like this, I think that's pretty unique.
If that's correct, yeah, that definitely sounds yeah, if that's correct, then it definitely sounds I'm a little surprised. I think the question on that would be about the facts that there are years that they're better and more ripe and less ripe. And I would question that, meaning look into it more just to see if that's a correct fact.
I'd say
Um,
the quality of the harvest has maybe something to do with if it comes up robustly or it doesn't come up robustly. I can't tell you, but the fact that I guess with everything else you have to have a certain season. I
if
guess I don't
Sukkot
know. I don't
comes
know
out
anything about
early,
farming. If
I
you
just
plant
know that if
wheat,
yeah, I
can
just
you
know if
plant
Sukkot
it
comes
all
out
year?
early, yeah,
I mean, I know it'll be thinner or thicker or but you can't. You can only do it during certain times.
right. No, there's a winter
This
crop and a summer crop, but you're right. But there's differences between the two. Yeah, there's a winter crop and a summer. It's specific. Yeah, yeah. No, you're right. But I would just question it because whenever Sukkot comes out early, the esrogim are not ripe. Then they're much more green. And according to what you're saying, I would think that they should have figured out how to, harvest the previous crop, early. Uh,
I
or
don't
maybe they
know.
can't. No, I guess it's not a proof. Maybe it grows maybe it takes a year to grow.
There's a
How fast does it
business,
take for them to grow? That's the question. Because
right?
maybe they grow from the previous year, so there's no way that they could switch it. I guess maybe that's
Or I don't know how long it takes to ripen. In some years, it may
right.
take longer, or nutrients, or the wind, or the temperature. I don't know. I'm not an estrich farmer, but it's something worth looking into. I'm only throwing something on the table for everybody to
I
think
hear.
about. And anyone can look to tell me that I'm wrong too. Whether or not an estrich is unique this way. That's all. And if
Right.
yes, that is a whole new dimension to the way we're reading the Gemara. Every time we say those words, it takes on, to me at least, a different meaning than, to say, it goes all year, whatever that means. Shana
I hear.
l'shana.
I hear. I do recall, and I have to look it up, but in Hasidic writings, it mentions that Hadar be'ilonai mishana lashana, that it lives through all the seasons. That the esrog, the understanding was that it stays on the tree
Right.
throughout all the seasons,
A
like it
year,
doesn't fall,
right.
of the year, that it's somehow connected to Achdus of Sukkot. Oh, Sukkot is all about Achdus, unity, and even the Esrog itself is a concept of unity, that it unites all the seasons, which is not a contradiction to what you're saying, but it's not the way I understood it. I understood it that it stays on the tree and it unites the seasons. The way you're saying it is it's connected to every season because it's not limited to one season more than another. So according to the way you're saying it, you could
and it stays on the tree all the time, right?
That's another point, that it stays on the tree the whole year. That's another element to it. But you're
that
adding
could be
a different point.
reflective. That would be reflective of the fact that it has no season, because otherwise I would think that apples
would fall off. And so because
well,
it has no
season, fall off too. I don't know.
Well,
I have no idea.
Right.
I have no idea.
Right. All right. Well, these are things we have to get someone who's going to look up. Hopefully, we'll have some helpers over here who are good at the internet. And if anyone wants to look into these things, what is unique about the Esrog tree? And as we saw here, there is an argument between the Rishonim. Rashi says that this is a proof that this is an Esrog because no other fruit does this, which is called Dar Be'ilane Mishana Lashana. And then the other commentaries argue and say the Ra'ah says, no, it's not true. There are other trees that have similar that are similar to this. So it's not the only tree like this. So anyway, so obviously,
well, that also would give us an advantage in that they didn't have an internet and they didn't have access to the whole world necessarily. When the Chacham says it, I'm not saying that oh, you didn't know. But if you're talking about a factual thing rather than a svara thing or an interpretation,
right?
Thank you. Sorry.
Shkoyach, Isaac. Okay, so the Gemara continued here and mentioned that we learned in the Mishnah about an Asherah, a lulav that comes from an Asherah tree, and a lulav that comes from a Ir Hanidachas, a city that was worshipped idols. They're gonna be destroyed. So the Gemara, let's do this Gemara one more time inside. It's on page 31b. 31b, 5 lines up from the bottom of the page. Shel Asherah v'shel Ir Hanidachas. That you have a lulav that's from an Asherah tree, a tree that's worshipped. Shel Ir Hanidachas, it's from a city that has been, majority of it has been convinced to worship, and they've worshipped Avodah Zarah, idols. And the law is that such a tree, such a city has to be destroyed. And so the Gemara says that the Shel Asherah puzzle is an Asherah, a tree that was worshipped. You can't take a lulav from that tree. If you take a lulav from it, it's invalid for Sukkot. The Gemara says, well, Amar Rava, didn't Rava say that lulav shel avodah zarah lo yito, that a lulav that is from avodah zarah, from idol worship, which either means it's they pass it by the avodah zarah, the idol, or they throw it to the idol, or they sweep before the idol with it. They use it as a broom. Rashi over here says, L'chabed lefaneha hakarka, to sweep the ground with it. In the olden days, they used to use a lulav. They didn't sell, Home Depot they didn't have Home Depots, sell brooms. They would get a branch. The branch, lulav branch, was a perfect broom. Or they served the idol with it. They brought it before the idol, or they would throw it to the idol, and that was somehow how they worshiped the idol with it. So this type of a branch that was used in that way, Rava says you shouldn't take it, lo yitol, ve'im natal, but if you did take it, it's kosher, it is kosher. So it sounds like it's usable, and our Mishnah said it's not usable. Asherah, a tree that's worshipped, you can't use it even after the fact. You don't fulfill the mitzvah. this is not a problem of benefiting from avodah zarah, which is prohibited to benefit from, but this is not an issue of benefiting from avodah zarah. It's a different issue. The issue of benefiting from avodah zarah doesn't kick in because mitzvahs lav lohanes nitnu. Mitzvahs are not meant to get benefit from, which means that the benefit that you get from a mitzvah is considered a side benefit. Even the reward you get for the mitzvah is a side benefit, and therefore you're not really benefiting from it. You're doing an obligation to Hashem. You're fulfilling an obligation to Hashem with this, but it's not a part of the prohibition of benefiting from a mitzvah. You're fulfilling an obligation, but it's not a benefit. Yeah, you get rewards for mitzvahs and so on, but that's not considered. It's not called a hanos haguf. There's no physical benefit, and therefore there's not a problem of the prohibition of getting benefit from idols. But nevertheless, there seems to be another issue where our Mishnah says you can't use it even after the fact. Rava says don't use it in the first place, but if you used it, it's kosher.